In a fantasy world like A Song of Ice and Fire, Stannis Baratheon is undoubtedly one of the most interesting and important characters within the story. But the relevance of his character within the broader narrative is often overlooked or completely unseen, despite the fact that it is arguably one of the most important keys to understanding the entire saga as it unfolds. Stannis is not an unfamiliar character archetype within the world of Ice and Fire. Like many others, he is someone who is put in a position of great power with the potential to gain even greater power, despite the fact that he is an incredibly flawed person whose individual failings can and does have a catastrophic effect on the world around him. He's also interesting and somewhat unique in the sense that he is not overtly or intentionally evil. And yet he is an overall unappealing character whose own sense of self-importance blinds him to the almost irrefutable fact that he is the absolute wrong guy for the job, regardless of whether or not he thinks that job is his birthright or a literal, magically predetermined destiny. Stannis is actually a quite capable man in many ways, and his accomplishments are not few. But his innately unappealing nature has undoubtedly curbed his ability to ascend within society in any manner aside from objective achievements. He's comically pragmatic, and his natural introversion and lack of affection for humanity in general almost certainly hamstrung his ability to make his goals into a reality. Like many characters in the world of Ice and Fire, he is a second son who has a great deal of responsibility and expectation thrust upon him once his older brother is gone. And he still feels the shadow of Robert Baratheon on him long after Robert is dead. And despite the fact that Stannis almost indisputably has the best claim to the Iron Throne after Robert is killed, Stannis' inability to play good politics or to acquiesce to anything outside of his rigidly structured sense of rule and order left him fighting an uphill battle for the crown. Still, Stannis has managed to inspire a devoted if limited following, for better and for worse. In a sense, his two most loyal devotees, Davos Seaworth and Melisandre, seem to represent the best and worst possibilities for Stannis' reign. While Davos is a down-to-earth man who admires Stannis for who Davos thinks he could be, Melisandre fanatically supports Stannis because of who she thinks he must be. And if Melisandre and Davos are the metaphorical angel and devil on Stannis' shoulders, then the two aspects of Stannis' character arc that they represent are the two sides of Stannis that are in constant conflict with one another. Stannis is an interesting character because he is so practical, rational, and businesslike. But Melisandre's support of him, belief in him, and her apparent mystical powers obviously lead Stannis to develop some kind of faith in her and her prophecies. But on a much more human and much more relatable level, Melisandre undoubtedly inspires Stannis to deviate from his ruthlessly pragmatic nature because she appeals to an aspect of him that has constantly needed satisfaction and has constantly been left unsatisfied. Because Stannis didn't just live in Robert's shadow because his big brother was the king. Stannis spent his entire life essentially feeling like he was getting shafted and was never being paid his due. So to have someone with magical powers show up and tell him that he is the chosen one who is literally destined to save the world almost undeniably influenced the lengths to which he'll go in order to win the crown. And this is truly the key to the story that Stannis Baratheon's character arc unlocks. Because what makes Stannis such an interesting character in the entire landscape of A Song of Ice and Fire is that despite the fact that he believes unfailingly in his cause, despite the fact that he is becoming convinced that he is fated to save humanity, and despite the fact that he genuinely thinks he might be the only one who even can avert the apocalypse, it is comically, embarrassingly obvious to the outside viewer that he is absolutely not the chosen one. Besides Melisandre's fervent belief in Stannis' importance, everything about Stannis' characterization screams that he is not the ordained hero. In a world populated by fantasy archetypes that seem like every version of a chosen one that you can imagine, Stannis is everything that they're not, which makes the evolution of his character all the more terrifying and likely all the more informative. Because from a third-person perspective, it's plain to see that Stannis is not meant to be king. He's not Azor Ahai reborn, and he is not going to wield Lightbringer and head an army that will save the continent from the coming darkness. And therefore, everything that he goes through and chooses to do is absolutely horrific. He conspires to kill his brother, He leads his men into a massacre. He considers killing a child to gain enough power to defeat his enemies. And he almost certainly will kill his own child in service of magic. And he does and will do this all in service of a belief that is blatantly not true. So ironically, despite the fact that Stannis is doing all that he does because he believes he's the hero, doing what he does makes him into the villain. And from a metatextual perspective, this is a really relevant lesson to be learned that should be applied more broadly to the story at large, even though it almost never is. Because again, the audience can clearly see that Stannis isn't the chosen one. There are plenty of potential chosen ones in A Song of Ice and Fire, and Stannis is obviously the least plausible option of the bunch. However, the chosen one is called the chosen one for a reason, because traditionally, there's only one of them. Of course, a huge element of George R.R. Martin's writing involves subverting classic fantasy storytelling archetypes. And on that basis, many fans assume that there may be more than one fated hero within the story. And in a sense, that is likely true. Or at least, many of the major characters will probably play a part in the climactic events of the narrative. But it seems like the very existence of Stannis Baratheon could be telling the audience to believe the exact opposite. Although there is legitimate potential for more than one epic hero to emerge towards the end of the story, it seems unlikely that that's the case. Because even if we're assuming that there could be more than one chosen one, that still means that many, if not most of the characters who are believed to be the ultimate ordained champion of humanity are not who they seem to be. In a classic fantasy story, Jon or Daenerys or Arya or Bran would be the hidden hero who is inevitably fated to save the world. In a classic fantasy story, they may go through trials and tribulations. They may make seemingly catastrophic mistakes, but their destiny was predetermined before they were even born, and any obstacle or misstep is irrelevant in the face of what they were meant to do. And in a classic fantasy story, Ned Stark would have lived, or Robb would have avenged his father and set everything right with the world. Even beyond the mainline novels themselves, the world of Ice and Fire is absolutely littered with characters who seemed like they were mystically anointed as vital cogs in the machine of destiny, who seemed like they were central figures in this saga, and who oftentimes believed that no one and nothing was more important than fate and the role that they were meant to play in it. But they all ultimately wound up not being the protagonist of the story. And of course, from an in-universe perspective, any character believing that they are destined for greatness should probably be a big warning sign that they are not. But from a metatextual perspective, it should be obvious that characters who feature the most blatant hallmarks of a classic fantasy hero are almost certainly not meant to play that role either. In reality, it seems unlikely that any one character is the fabled chosen one. From a thematic perspective, the idea that A Song of Ice and Fire will end with one protagonist who manages to do what no one else could just doesn't make sense. In a story that is built on subverting tropes, it's very hard to believe that the ultimate climax will embrace the most obvious fantasy trope of all. And ultimately, it's difficult to imagine a world in which George R.R. Martin would justify any character's rights or wrongs by making it seem like it was all worth it because it was in service of averting the apocalypse. Stannis is a horrifying character because we are metatextually aware that he's making unforgivable decisions in service of an incorrect belief. But that doesn't change the fact that he does believe in his reasons. And it doesn't change that he is the one who is ultimately making those decisions. And the moral question that Stannis' actions pose doesn't change because one character seems more like a traditional fantasy hero than another. The notion that committing atrocities is only acceptable if the ends justify the means is almost certainly not one of the philosophical lessons that the story is trying to teach. So the audience really should be questioning every abhorrent choice that is being made in service of some potential, imagined greater good. It's no coincidence that every character who seems like they could be the ultimate hero has done things that are objectively morally unsettling, and giving them a pass because their actions may yield some positive results down the line would be a mistake. As we can see with many characters in the past, and as we can see in the deconstruction of Stannis Baratheon, The belief in your own importance and having unshakable faith in your own imagined destiny never leads anywhere good, and it seemingly yields unfathomable tragedy in service of absolutely nothing. The characters who believe that they're the hero of the story are almost unfailingly and undeniably wrong, so it's not hard to imagine that George R.R. Martin created a world in which our own beliefs about the heroes fated to save humanity are ultimately wrong as well. Stannis is a character who began with good intentions and whose end will undoubtedly be one of the most horrifying and immoral. But he exists for a reason, and he is likely meant to challenge everything that we think we know about the real heroes of the story. But what do you think? Is Stannis a part of the story as a challenge to the entire concept of the Chosen One? Leave your comments and opinions below, and if you're interested in more content like this, like and subscribe.